Ancient China, Part 1.
China is huge. You just have to look at a map to realize how far its immense territory extends.
Wow! It's like almost half a continent.
True, it's really big. It's so big. There are a number of different climates and landscapes all in one country. China is a world in itself with dense jungles, vast deserts, insurmountable mountains, fertile prairies, dense marshes, and frozen plains. Brr! Long ago, the Chinese saw that the world was made up of very different things, and that each thing had its opposite. They began to think of nature as something in balance, a harmony of different opposing forces. So if it was cold in one place, it was because it was hot in another. If the earth existed, it was because air existed too. If the sun shone during the day, it was the moon that ruled at night. Men had male energy, women had female energy. Opposite, but in balance. These observations about the nature that surrounded them is the basis of a philosophy. They used this philosophy to build a great civilization that has lasted for thousands and thousands of years.
Creating an empire.
The Yellow River makes a line right through the middle of China. This is where the first human settlements that would eventually grow into this great civilization began to develop, around 5000 BC. That was 7,000 years ago. The settlements grew and developed, and eventually, around 1500 BC, they all became dominated by a ruling family called the Shang. Because the rulers were all from the same family, we call it a dynasty. The Shang dynasty ruled for over 700 years. Then, the Shang dynasty was replaced by the Zhou dynasty. But after them, several families wanted the job, and for a while it was everyone against everyone. This was called the Era of Warring States, which lasted until 221 BC, when a new dynasty of warrior rulers managed to unify the country and establish an empire that gave China its name, the Qin. Qin Shi Huang proclaimed himself emperor, the first in all of China's history. He was so powerful, people thought he was the son of heaven who possessed magical powers. And no one was allowed to argue with him. I disagree. Yikes! But the Lord of all men wasn't allowed to play, sing, or even laugh. He always had to stand up, and his movements were supposed to be very slow. Qin Shi Huang did a lot to make China into one empire. He built roads and canals so people could move about and trade with each other. He made sure everyone started using the same money, the same calendar, and even the same kind of writing, and imposed a system of laws. But there were people who didn't like Qin Shi Huang. They got very angry, and at one point, 460 wise men representing them began to oppose the emperor's measures. Qin Shi Huang did not hesitate in condemning them to death. Later, all the books by China's wise men were burnt in huge bonfires. If there's one thing that history teaches us, it's that someone who has limitless power is not someone you want angry at you.
The Great Wall.
Qin Shi Huang had to worry about more than just putting down revolutions. The empire was frequently being raided by invaders from the north. Qin Shi Huang wanted to keep them out. But how? His plan was simple. He would build a huge wall all along the border of his empire. Building the Great Wall of China would be one of the largest construction projects in human history. Construction of the wall was started during Qin Shi Huang's reign, but it was carried out in various stages, and construction lasted over 2,000 years. By the end, the wall was 9 meters tall and 7,300 kilometers long. That's as long as all of South America. The wall winds through valleys, mountains, and deserts, and connects together over 25,000 watchtowers. Building the wall involved a superhuman effort. To do this, the emperor gathered together thousands of men who worked as slaves under military discipline. Many of them died of exhaustion, and their bodies were buried within parts of the wall that were being built. So not only is it the largest wall, but it's also the longest cemetery in the world. The wall served as a defense, but it also helped to unify the empire, because a path stretched along across the top of it, making it possible to travel from one point of the empire to the other. So merchant caravans could travel across it and sell their products without the fear of being ambushed by bandits or thieves.
You can't take my stuff if I'm on this wall.
But let's get back to Qin Shi Huang. When the emperor came to the end of his life, he decided his death would be on as large a scale as his life. The Chinese believed that when you went to the afterlife, you could take things with you. And Qin Shi Huang wasn't going to pack light. He ordered the building of a tomb in which he placed 8,000 terracotta statues of warriors. And these weren't just copies of the same mold. Each statue was an exact copy of the people who had accompanied the emperor when alive. Then, in case anyone had the terrible idea of breaking in and disturbing the emperor's tomb, there were crossbows set up to fire automatically.
Master Kong.
In the year 551 BC, while China was in the midst of the era of warring states, a very special man was born. Over the years, he became a great wise man who, with his teachings, created a doctrine that has come to characterize Chinese culture, and whose teachings are still commonly used today, 1,500 years later. This man, Confucius, was born to a poor family. Although this did not stop him from studying and working very hard until he became a minister for one of the kings who was fighting for power. But one day, tired of so much violence, betrayal, and deceit, Confucius abandoned his post as minister and dedicated himself to walking from one kingdom to another to share his wisdom. Confucius preached 8 basic virtues: respect for others, tolerance, forgiveness, fidelity, devotion, confidence, duty, and the cult of ancestors.
These 8 virtues are the ones a person should follow to be good and upright.
The popularity of his teaching grew, but it wasn't until 350 years later that it was popular all across China. This happened during the Han Dynasty. By that time, Confucius had become a legendary figure. His followers called him Master Kong, and his teachings served as a spiritual guide and were practiced like a religion. This doctrine was called Confucianism, and it was not the only one in ancient China. There was also Taoism and Buddhism. Each person had the right to freely choose and practice his or her own beliefs. The 3 were based on a search for inner harmony, which is in direct relationship with the harmony of nature. Let's dig a little deeper with our time compass and find out what else was going on around the world at that time. While Qin Shi Huang was proclaiming himself Emperor of China, let's see what was happening way over in Rome. Remember that it was the year 221 BC, and Rome was not yet an empire. What's more, at that time, it didn't even control all of Italy. In the year 221 BC, Rome was a republic and was governed by a group of illustrious people known as senators. 20 years later, in the year 201 BC, after conquering the powerful city of Carthage, Rome managed to extend its territory. But it was still a republic without an emperor. A few years later, in the year 51 BC, a great general named Julius Caesar managed to conquer the strategic lands of the Gauls and set into motion the formation of the great Roman Empire. In the year 27 BC, his adopted son Octavius became Augustus, the first Roman emperor.
Just like Qin Shi Huang in China?
Yes, except that it was almost 200 years later. Come with me now to see what's coming up in the second part of this exciting civilization. The Chinese were really ingenious and invented all kinds of things like gunpowder, kites, the printing press, porcelain, but perhaps the world's most exciting discovery was made by worms.
That's right, worms. You see, 5,000 years ago, the Chinese discovered that each one of us, just before becoming butterflies, makes a cocoon by rolling up a single, very fine thread.
The Chinese wove this thread into silk. This wonderful material became prized all over the world, and everyone wanted some. the Chinese and their silk would become famous throughout the world.